Good morning. Good morning. Welcome back to another episode of the Richie Hicks Jr. Sports Podcast. I am your host, Richie, bringing you the goods on some NFL news and notes. Gonna start it out in New York. Giants, my favorite team, just 3 days into the offseason, stir up much controversy with their huge coaching overhaul. We knew that Bobby Johnson, the offensive line coach, was going to be let go. We knew that the special teams coach was going to be let go. But I think part of the shock of what has happened in East Rutherford over the course of the last couple of days in an ever moving story is that very popular, well respected defensive coordinator Wink Martindale appears to be on the outside looking in. His two trusted lieutenants, the Wilkins brothers, were unceremoniously fired just hours after the Giants' 27-10 victory in their season finale over their rivals, the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, Jay Glazer earlier in the year reported that there was a legitimate rift between head coach Brian Daboll and defensive coordinator Wink Martindale. Daboll kind of fanned the flames, saying that the only thing that they argue about is the last piece of pizza. But obviously and clearly, this was a bigger situation. Now, as many of you probably already know, whenever you're a coach, it is common nature to bring your trusted assistants along to the ride. The Wilkins brothers coached with Wink in Baltimore. And speaking of Baltimore, the Giants' defense was a mixed bag. They led the league in forcing turnovers, but were also among the league's worst defenses in giving up points and yards. So it's a mixed bag for sure with the New York Giants. But I do believe that towards the end of the year, they were playing at a much higher level. And anyone who watches the Giants consistently would be able to tell you that for the majority of the year, the offense was broken and the defense often got frustrated and tired, but kept the Giants in most games. This most definitely causes a stir up also to the roster. Because let's say hypothetically, if the New York Giants should move to a 4-3 as opposed to a 3-4, a staple of the Giants defense, a guy like Xavier McKinney might not be as prioritized or important in this coming offseason. But back to the matter at hand between the two coaches. What I don't like about this situation is not so much that they're moving on from Wink. It's the nature in which they did this in. I believe that it was very unprofessional to kind of blindside Wink and get rid of two of his assistants. Now, there have been some new reports coming out that when Wink found out about this, he cursed out Coach Daboll and headed to his home in Florida. There were reports that Wink resigned. That is not entirely true just yet. He is still an employee of the New York Giants, whether he coaches or not next year. Very unlikely that it will be for the Giants. The value in the organization getting him to resign is that if you fire him, he can go to division rival Philly, a team that more than likely will be looking for a new defensive coordinator. I will say this as a fan. Brian Daboll, Joe Shane coming together. Kafka is a Daboll guy. The offense has been an eyesore for the Giants the majority of the year. They did play better towards the end of the year. And, granted, they had three different quarterbacks, bad offensive line. But if this overhaul doesn't work, nobody next year will be up for blame other than head coach Brian Daboll. I think it goes without saying that the New York Giants are going to try to improve the offensive line in a big way during the offseason, probably in free agency and via the draft, being that they are picking sixth. And there is also a strong possibility that the New York Giants will be upgrading the quarterback position, possibly a Jaden Daniels, should he fall to six, possibly a J.J. McCarthy if they look for a quarterback in round two. But just not the kind of thing that you want going into the offseason, because I think the issue here is that for players that are going to want to consider the Giants as a destination, they might look at some of this as trust issues and credibility issues if the Giants are a place that you want to play for, a place that you want to call home. It appears that the true rift, above all else, with Dable and Wink was that, according to reports, Dable felt that Wink's coaches only answered to Wink and didn't give him that head coach respect. Now, Wink had aspirations of being a head coach in the past. He came back for a second year with the Giants. But anyone who's played organized sports on any level knows you can't really have two head coaches because it's a mixed message, and authority gets, very murky, I guess would be the right word to say. But it's going to be a very interesting offseason for the Giants. And I have a couple of suggestions on some coaches that they might want to look into bringing. Semi-retired offensive line coach Mike Munchak, who has recently stated that he wants to get back in the NFL, would be a terrific option to bring in as your offensive line coach. As the defense goes, my top choice would be Antonio Pierce, who is currently the interim head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. In the event that Pierce does not retain the Raider job, I think it would be cool to bring him back to East Rutherford. He was on the 2007 Super Bowl winning Giants and one of the more popular players. More importantly, I think he's proven his worth as a coach. A second choice, which I think is kind of an obvious one, would be Leslie Frazier, who formerly worked with Dable in Buffalo. Back to my point about coaches keeping underlings, guys that they have worked with in the past. But Brian Dable is the offensive guy. Wink Martindale is the defensive guy. And when your defense is tied with the best team in professional football and causing turnovers and you get dismissed and your lieutenants go with you, and the offense has underachieved all year, the pressure is undeniably on Shane, the GM, and Dable, the head coach, to just do better. Because in year 3, if the Giants have a similar season to what they did this year, not to mention that when you change a defensive scheme, it takes a legitimate amount of time to adjust. Big Blue cannot afford to start another season 2-8. Brian Dable will be replaced. He has already surpassed the 2-year threshold, which previous coaches Joe Judge and Pat Shurmur were not able to keep after the legendary Tom Coughlin was forced to retire. Essentially, he was fired in what was a very dubious move by the New York Giants and very unpopular amongst the players and fan base. Those of you who may remember saw legendary quarterback Eli Manning weeping at Tom Coughlin's exit interview, and he did not shake hands with the owner, John Mara. Over the years, that relationship has somewhat been mended. Moving it along to a former New York Giant legend, but who really made it in New England, we're going to speak on Bill Belichick. Recent reports out of Boston say that Belichick may be willing to relinquish the GM duties. I've been saying for the better part of a couple of weeks here on the show that I believe that Bill Belichick is still a phenomenal coach, but that the Patriot brass might want to go in a different direction for GM because the Patriots have not had great drafts lately. I have said recently on my show, this is a team that needs a wide receiver 1 as well as a new quarterback. But from a talent-based standpoint, I don't think the New England Patriots are that far from being a good football team again. When you think about the issues they've had on offense and their ability to compete on most game days, I don't think the Patriots are that far. But it's very alarming when you have 6 banners. Tom Brady's out of the fold now, going on a 4th year. He's currently retired. He went to Tampa. He won another Super Bowl. It's put up or shut up time for Bill Belichick. And when you think about a lot of assistants or former head coaches now that have been relieved of duties, the 2 that come to mind, Mike Vrabel as well as Josh McDaniels, there is a distinct possibility that you could see a shakeup with GM and some of these other coaches could come back to help out Bill. McDaniels has failed for a second consecutive time as a head coach, but he has always been known as one of the better coordinators. Mike Vrabel, in my opinion, is a damn good head coach and might actually get an opportunity to take on a similar role. But I would have to think, given his Patriot ties, there is a possibility he could go back to New England to help out Bill. And speaking of Bills, Bill O'Brien, who currently works under Belichick, also formerly on his resume, was the general manager for the Houston Texans. Perhaps he goes upstairs, and that brings the ability for them to bring in a new play caller. New England, similar to the Giants, under construction, and there's going to be a lot of overhaul with coaches. But a lot of times in the NFL, it goes based on a lot of familiarity. You look at a guy like Matt Patricia, who at the end of the season was promoted to Eagles DC. He's another former head coach that failed. He has Patriot ties as well. He may come back. But with the Patriots and Giants both drafting in the top 10, I think better days are on the horizon. I still am 50-50 on if Belichick really wants to relinquish the GM duties. When you've delivered 6 Super Bowls to that franchise, I have a hard time believing that it's going to be an easy sell to him. But we shall see. I'm going to hit you with some predictions on some teams that are going to be looking for head coaches. The Los Angeles Chargers, Las Vegas Raiders, Atlanta Falcons, and Tennessee Titans. Who's next for head coach? I'm going to start with the Chargers. I think the popular opinion amongst most people is that recent national champion coach for the college ranks, Jim Harbaugh, will be making his NFL return, and he already has a superstar quarterback, which in a quarterback-driven league is a huge building piece in Justin Herbert. I believe that he will be back in the NFL and with the Chargers. As the Raiders go, if you look at recent history, they made a mistake getting rid of interim head coach Rich Bisaccia. I believe that this time they don't make the similar mistake and they reward Antonio Pierce for his good second half of the year, taking over in the middle of the year for Josh McDaniels. The Atlanta Falcons can go a ton of different ways. Recently fired coach Mike Vrabel might end up there. And I also think that you can't take any of these NFC teams out of the equation for a guy like a Bill Belichick. Because if Belichick were to move on, it would probably require a trade. And similar to the New York Giants situation with Wink, not wanting him to be a DC for a division rival, like I said, the Eagles need a DC. I think similarly, the Patriots, if they're going to move on from Bill, would want to trade him to the opposite conference. So I would say that when it comes to the Falcons, maybe. A team that I did not list here, but I do want to speak on, is the Washington Commanders. Roughly a year ago, when Eric Bieniemy got hired to essentially be the assistant head coach, I think the writing was on the wall that Ron Rivera's days were numbered. Now, Bieniemy, who the majority of his coaching career was right next to Andy Reid, might be the logical option. But given the Commanders' draft capital, a super blockbuster trade could be New England sending Belichick there. And when you think about the defensive mind that Bill Belichick is, mixed with the offensive mind that Eric Bieniemy is, that could be a great building start for a Commanders team that has been down for way too long. A lot going on in the NFL, a lot to unpack. And I want to give you guys and girls a heads up that tonight, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to be going live with our AFC Super Wildcard Weekend prediction show. 3 huge games in the AFC this weekend that can really go a lot of ways. So we are going to hit on those and kind of give a backstory of how each team got there. You got a lot of great stories in the AFC and NFC alike for these playoffs. You have a Buffalo team that jumped from 6-2 in the final week of the season. You have a Miami team that fell from 2 to 6 and now has the dubious task, unenviable task of having to go into Kansas City in below zero temperatures and try to pull off the upset against the defending world champions. You've got the Cinderella story of the year in Joe Flacco, who was semi-retired coming off his couch, a former Super Bowl MVP over a decade ago, who most people figured his career was over. He has led the Cleveland Browns, who broke the quarterback money market for Deshaun Watson. He's been their best quarterback, Mr. Flacco, and he's going to take the Browns into Houston to take on likely Rookie of the Year offensively, Mr. CJ Stroud. D'Amico Ryans, great job he's done in Houston against Kevin Stefanski. In my opinion, the two best logical options for NFL Coach of the Year. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. And of course, we talk about great coaching. Less than a month ago, people were asking for Mike Tomlin's head. Now Mike Tomlin basically resurrected a Steelers season with injuries galore at the quarterback position, and he has made it happen. So that game against Buffalo is going to be quite the chess match. While Buffalo has the better roster and I believe should win the game, I am not going to argue who is the more tenured seasoned coach in those kind of moments. So it's going to be a great AFC wildcard weekend. We are splitting our shows in two. The NFC will have its own individual show as the week progresses. But 10:30 p.m. tonight, we'll be going live, and I'll hit you guys with a couple of reminders as the day moves along. Before I get out of here, though, I got to talk about the New York Knicks 5-game winning streak and the benefit of the RJ Barrett trade. Since bringing in OG, the Knicks' energy has just been on a different stratosphere. It was the kind of trade where a lot of Knicks fans were very hesitant, not so much because of RJ Barrett, but because of losing Emmanuel quickly. Right now, the Knicks are playing their best basketball in the last year and a half. And they are gradually approaching the 2 and 3 spots in the Eastern Conference. While I don't think anyone is going to catch Boston for best record, the Knicks are continuing to climb the ladder, and it is a very exciting time to be a New York Knicks fan. So we are going to see how this plays out and if they're going to add any more talent before the trade deadline. We will be back tonight, 10:30 p.m., Super Wildcard Weekend, AFC predictions. Have a great Wednesday, y'all. We'll see you later.